The first thing I noticed as I opened the front door was the eerie silence. Normally, Chloe would be in the living room, earbuds in, scrolling on her phone or finishing up homework. Instead, the house felt like a vacuum, as though all the air had been sucked out. I kicked off my shoes, exhaustion tugging at my every step after a grueling 48-hour shift at the hospital. The surgery, a marathon operation on a premature infant, had been a success, but the emotional weight still lingered. Saving lives came with a cost, and right now, my body was demanding payment. "Chloe?" I called out, my voice echoing through the quiet house. In here came a small, hesitant voice from the dining room. I rounded the corner to find her seated at the table, her head bowed over a stack of papers. Her blonde hair, Vanessa's hair, hid her face, but the tension in her posture was unmistakable. My heart sank. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light despite the knot forming in my stomach. Chloe looked up, her blue eyes rimmed with worry. "Dad, Mom left these." She gestured to the papers in front of her, and my breath caught as I saw the bold heading at the top. Custody petition. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself, my mind racing. Vanessa. Of course, it was Vanessa. She never missed an opportunity to stir the pot. But this? Filing for custody? It was a new low, even for her. I sat down across from Chloe, my hands trembling as I skimmed the document. Words like unfit parent and unstable environment jumped out at me, each one a dagger aimed straight at my chest. Vanessa had painted me as a workaholic who barely had time for his daughter, unworthy of the responsibility of raising her. When did she leave these? I asked, my voice tight. "This morning," Chloe replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said she was meeting with her lawyer tomorrow, and that I should be there too." I stared at her, the betrayal cutting deeper than I expected. Vanessa had always been manipulative, but dragging Chloe into this? It was unforgivable. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," I said firmly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "This is between your mom and me. Don't let her put you in the middle." Chloe nodded, but her shoulders remained hunched, her expression uncertain. She said you're never around, that I need stability, and that she can give me that." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. I couldn't deny that my job demanded long hours, or that there were times I had missed recitals, parent-teacher conferences, and late-night chats. But I loved Chloe with everything I had, and the idea of losing her felt like losing a piece of myself. "Chloe," I began, my voice soft but resolute. "I know I'm not perfect. My job takes up a lot of time, and sometimes I miss things I shouldn't. But everything I do, every late night, every long shift, is for you. I need you to know that." She looked at me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I know, Dad, but sometimes it feels like I'm not as important as your job." Her honesty hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but deep down, I knew she wasn't. My career had consumed so much of my time and energy that even I had started to question whether it was worth the sacrifices. "Chloe, I promise you this. I'm going to fight for you," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside me. "Your mom might think she can use my job against me, but she doesn't understand what we have, and I won't let her take you away." Chloe nodded, a flicker of hope returning to her expression. I don't want to have to choose." "You won't," I said firmly. "This isn't about choosing sides. It's about making sure you're happy and safe. That's all that matters." That night, after Chloe had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, the custody petition spread out on the coffee table in front of me. Anger, hurt, and determination coursed through me in equal measure. Vanessa's claims about my parenting weren't just an attack on my character. They were an attack on the bond one shared with my daughter. As I stared at the papers, I reflected on the years that had led to this moment. My career had been my calling, but it had also been a wedge in my marriage. Vanessa had used my dedication as a weapon before, planting seeds of doubt in Chloe's mind. And now, she was trying to take it a step further. But this time, I wasn't going to let her win. I had sacrificed too much, worked too hard, and loved Chloe too deeply to let Vanessa rewrite our story. As the clock ticked past midnight, I made a silent vow. I would fight for Chloe with everything I had. No matter what it took, I would prove that I was the parent she needed, the parent she deserved. The law firm's conference room was cold and sterile, with its glass walls and minimalist decor. It felt more like a battleground than a place where lives would be discussed and dissected. I sat at one end of the long mahogany table, my attorney, Marcus, beside me. Across from us sat Vanessa, looking every bit as poised and calculated as I expected, and her lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Richard Ames. Chloe wasn't there, thankfully. Vanessa must have thought it better to keep her away from the initial clash. At least she had the decency to spare our daughter from witnessing the tension firsthand. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Blake," Richard began, his tone dripping with artificial politeness. "We understand this is a sensitive matter, and our goal is to resolve it in a way that's best for Chloe." I resisted the urge to scoff. If this was really about Chloe's best interests, we wouldn't be here in the first place. Vanessa's smug expression told me this was more about control than concern. "Let's get straight to the point," Marcus interjected, his calm but firm voice cutting through the pretense. "What exactly is your client seeking?" Richard adjusted his tie before sliding a folder across the table. "Full custody," he said. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral, unwilling to give Vanessa the satisfaction of seeing me falter. "Full custody?" Marcus repeated, his eyebrows raised. "On what grounds?" Vanessa leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands resting on the table. "Ethan's job is demanding," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "He's gone for long hours, sometimes days at a time. Chloe needs stability, and I can provide that." Her lawyer jumped in, flipping through the documents in the folder. "We've compiled examples of Dr. Blake's absences, missed parent-teacher conferences, school events, and even times when Chloe had to rely on others because her father wasn't available." I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to remain calm. The examples they presented weren't untrue, but they were cherry-picked to paint the worst possible picture. "I'll admit my schedule is demanding," I said evenly, "but Chloe has never lacked for support. I've always made sure she's cared for, even when I couldn't be there physically. And let's not pretend Vanessa's record is spotless. She's the one who moved halfway across the country for her new job and left Chloe behind with me." Vanessa's calm exterior cracked for a brief moment, her lips tightening into a thin line. "That was temporary," she snapped, "and I still made time for Chloe, even from a distance." Marcus leaned forward, his expression cool and calculated. "It's interesting you bring that up, Vanessa. We have evidence that during those months, you missed more than half of your scheduled visits with Chloe. Would you like us to discuss that in detail?" Richard's expression flickered, but he quickly regained his composure. "This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about what's best for Chloe moving forward." "That's exactly what I'm focused on," I said firmly. "Chloe deserves stability, yes, but she also deserves honesty. Vanessa's trying to use my career against me, but the reality is, I've been there for Chloe every day while Vanessa prioritized her own ambitions." The tension in the room was palpable. Vanessa avoided my gaze, her hands tightening into fists as Richard tried to steer the conversation back to their narrative. "Dr. Blake," he said, his tone almost condescending, "no one is questioning your love for Chloe, but love alone doesn't create a stable home environment. Your work as a surgeon is admirable, but it requires long hours and unpredictable schedules. Vanessa can provide Chloe with the consistency she needs." Before I could respond, Marcus spoke up, his tone razor-sharp. "Consistency doesn't mean better. Dr. Blake's career is demanding, yes, but it's also secure and provides Chloe with financial stability, a safe home, and access to opportunities. Let's not ignore the fact that Vanessa's recent financial troubles suggest she might struggle to provide the same." Vanessa's face flushed, but she remained silent. Richard shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for the turn the conversation had taken. "Chloe is 16, Marcus continued. "She's old enough to express her preferences, and from what I understand, she's happy with the arrangement as it stands. Forcing a change based on assumptions about Dr. Blake's schedule is both unnecessary and disruptive. The meeting dragged on, with Richard and Vanessa throwing every accusation they could muster, and Marcus countering each one with facts and logic. I stayed quiet for the most part, letting my lawyer handle the technicalities, but I made sure to chime in when it mattered. By the time we left, my emotions were a tangled mess of anger, frustration, and determination. Vanessa's attempt to paint me as an unfit parent was underhanded, but it had only strengthened my resolve. As Marcus and I walked to the car, he placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "They're playing dirty, Ethan, but we've got this. Keep your focus on Chloe, that's what matters most." I nodded, the weight of the battle ahead settling on my shoulders. Vanessa might have underestimated me, but I wasn't going to back down. This was about more than custody. It was about proving to Chloe that I was there for her, no matter what. The parent-teacher conference was held in the school's multipurpose room, a bright but slightly outdated space filled with the hum of conversation and the faint smell of coffee. Parents milled about, chatting with teachers and flipping through progress reports. Normally, I would have felt a sense of pride walking into Chloe's school, knowing how smart and capable she was. But today, I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. As I stepped inside, I scanned the room for Chloe's teachers. The plan was simple: gather updates on her performance and reaffirm my involvement in her education. But I couldn't ignore the whispers. Conversations seemed to quiet as I walked past, parents casting me sidelong glances. It didn't take long to figure out why. "Dr. Blake." I turned to see Mrs. Callahan, Chloe's history teacher, approaching with a tight smile. She was an older woman with a kind face, though her expression today was tinged with caution. "Mrs. Callahan," I said, shaking her hand, "thanks for meeting with me. How's Chloe doing in your class?" "She's doing well," she said carefully, flipping through a folder. "Her essays are thoughtful, and she participates in discussions." "But," she hesitated, her eyes darting toward a cluster of parents nearby. "But what?" I prompted, my stomach sinking. "Well," she began, lowering her voice, "there's been some talk. Vanessa has been very vocal about her concerns for Chloe's home environment. She's mentioned your work schedule and how it affects your ability to parent effectively." I felt the blood drain from my face. "She's been spreading that around here?" Mrs. Callahan nodded, looking uncomfortable. "She's spoken to several teachers and parents. I didn't want to bring it up, but since you're here—" "Thank you for letting me know," I said, keeping my tone steady even as anger bubbled beneath the surface. Vanessa's manipulations knew no bounds. It wasn't enough for her to attack me in court. She had to tarnish my reputation in Chloe's school community too. I spent the next hour meeting with Chloe's other teachers, all of whom echoed Mrs. Callahan's sentiments. Chloe was excelling academically, but Vanessa's whispers had planted seeds of doubt about my involvement as a parent. By the time I finished, I was seething. As I prepared to leave, I spotted Vanessa across the room, chatting animatedly with a group of parents. Her laughter carried across the room, a practiced sound meant to charm. My fists clenched at my sides. "Dr. Blake," a voice called from behind me. It was Mrs. Callahan again, her expression apologetic. "If I can offer some advice, I think it's important that you address this directly with the parents and teachers. Vanessa's narrative is gaining traction, and silence might be seen as an admission." I nodded, appreciating her candor. "Thanks, Mrs. Callahan. I'll handle it." The question was how. Confronting Vanessa directly would likely escalate the situation, but allowing her lies to fester was unacceptable. I took a deep breath, weighing my options, before deciding on a middle ground. Later that week, I requested a meeting with the school's principal, Mr. Donovan, a pragmatic man with a reputation for fairness. Sitting across from him in his office, I laid out the situation. "I understand Vanessa's concerns," I said, keeping my tone measured. "But what she's doing, spreading rumors about me, is damaging not just to my reputation, but to Chloe's experience here. I want to ensure that her education isn't impacted by this custody battle." Mr. Donovan nodded thoughtfully. "We've noticed the tension," he admitted. "And while we try to stay neutral in matters like this, I agree that Chloe's well-being comes first. I'll speak to the staff and remind them to focus on facts, not hearsay." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. "I appreciate your understanding." As I left the office, I felt a renewed sense of determination. Vanessa might be playing dirty, but I wasn't going to stoop to her level. Instead, I would counter her lies with truth and let my actions speak for themselves. At home that evening, Chloe seemed more relaxed than she had in days. We sat at the kitchen table, working through her math homework together. Routine that had become a small but cherished part of our evenings. "Dad," she said suddenly, looking up from her notebook, "Mom told me you might lose custody because of your job. Is that true?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my voice calm. "Chloe, no one can decide that except the court, and I'm doing everything I can to show them how much I care about you. My job is important, but nothing is more important than you." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know you work hard, Dad. I don't want to lose you." "You won't," I said firmly, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "No matter what happens, we'll get through this together." That night, as I watched Chloe drift off to sleep, I made a silent promise to her and to myself. Vanessa could spread all the rumors she wanted, but I wasn't going to let her rewrite the narrative of my relationship with Chloe. I had come too far to back down now. The atmosphere in Marcus's office was thick with anticipation. His desk, usually clutter-free, was now covered in files, printouts, and notes scribbled on yellow legal pads. We were in the thick of it, combing through every shred of information we could find to build a case against Vanessa's custody claims. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes scanning a document. "Ethan, I think we've got something here," he said, sliding the paper across the desk. I picked it up, my brow furrowing as I read. It was a bank statement, Vanessa's bank statement. Her account was riddled with overdraft fees, unpaid credit card balances, and suspicious transactions that painted a clear picture of financial instability. "She's in deep," Marcus said. "Maxed out cards, loans she can't repay. This isn't someone who can provide the stability she's claiming in court." I felt a flicker of vindication, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger. Vanessa had accused me of being an unfit parent while hiding her own glaring shortcomings. Worse, she was using Chloe as a pawn in her game, manipulating her emotions to turn her against me. Marcus handed me another folder. "Take a look at this," he said. Inside were printouts of text messages and emails between Vanessa and Chloe, communications I hadn't seen until now. They were filled with subtle digs at me, cleverly disguised as concern. "I know your dad loves you, but don't you think it's unfair that he's always working? I just want you to have a normal life, Chloe. Don't you deserve that?" Each message felt like a slap in the face. Vanessa wasn't just attacking me. She was planting seeds of doubt in Chloe's mind, making her question my love and commitment. "She's good," Marcus said, his tone bitter. "Too good. But this is exactly the kind of behavior the court needs to see. It's emotional manipulation, plain and simple." I nodded, my jaw tightening. I won't let her get away with this. We worked late into the evening, piecing together a timeline of Vanessa's actions. Marcus pulled out more damning evidence. Emails showing Vanessa using Chloe's school address to apply for credit cards, receipts for lavish purchases she couldn't afford, and even a record of a bounced rent check from her apartment. "This is more than enough to challenge her claims of stability," Marcus said. "But we need to be strategic. Timing is everything." I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly. "What do you suggest?" "Hold off for now," he said. "Let her think she has the upper hand. We'll present everything during the custody hearing when she least expects it." The idea of waiting made my skin crawl, but I trusted Marcus. He had been my rock throughout this ordeal, and his track record spoke for itself. The next day, I picked Chloe up from school. She climbed into the car, her usual cheerful demeanor clouded by something I couldn't quite place. "Hey, kiddo," I said, glancing at her as I pulled out of the parking lot. "Everything okay?" She hesitated before answering. "Mom said she might lose her apartment," she said quietly. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. So Vanessa had started playing the sympathy card, using her financial troubles to guilt Chloe into siding with her. "Did she tell you why?" I asked carefully. Chloe shook her head. "Just that she's stressed, and that the custody stuff isn't helping." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Chloe, I know this is a lot to deal with, but you don't have to carry your mom's stress. That's not your responsibility. She nodded, though her expression remained troubled. I just want everything to go back to normal. So do I said softly, and I'm working on it. Just hang in there, okay? That evening, after Chloe had gone to bed, I sat in the living room with Marcus's files spread out before me. The weight of everything, Vanessa's lies, Chloe's confusion, the impending court battle, felt crushing. But as I reviewed the evidence we had gathered, a sense of determination began to replace my frustration. Vanessa had underestimated me, believing she could manipulate her way to victory without consequences. But she was wrong. The next morning, Marcus called with another update. I found something else, he said, his voice tinged with urgency. A recording. A recording of what? I asked, my heart racing. It's Vanessa, he said, coaching Chloe on what to say about you in court. It's damning. My stomach turned. The idea of Vanessa using Chloe like that made my blood boil. How did you get it? A mutual friend shared it, Marcus said. Someone who's just as fed up with Vanessa's antics as you are. Trust me, Ethan. This is the nail in the coffin. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the recording settling over me. It was exactly what we needed, but it also felt like a betrayal too far. Vanessa wasn't just hurting me. She was hurting Chloe, twisting her perception of our relationship to suit her agenda. We'll use it, I said finally, but only when the time is right. Marcus agreed, and as we ended the call, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Vanessa might have thought she could manipulate her way to victory, but she had underestimated one thing: my love for Chloe. I wasn't just fighting for custody, I was fighting for the truth, and I wouldn't stop until it came to light. The family courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, yet its walls seemed to hum with the weight of the lives it had judged. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Marcus, the folder of evidence resting between us. Across the aisle, Vanessa and Richard whispered to each other, their confidence palpable. She wore her signature look of calm control, but I could see the tension in the tight line of her jaw. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, entered, and everyone rose. This hearing to determine custody of Chloe Blake is now in session, she announced, her voice firm. As we sat back down, I stole a glance at Vanessa. Her posture was perfect, her expression carefully composed. She had spent years honing the image of a loving, devoted mother, and today, she would use it to her advantage. Richard was the first to speak, presenting their case with a polished ease that was both impressive and infuriating. Your Honor, he began, this case is not about love. We do not dispute Dr. Blake's affection for his daughter. However, love alone cannot provide stability, and stability is what Chloe needs most. He painted a picture of me as a man so consumed by his career that I had neglected my duties as a father. He referenced missed parent-teacher conferences, forgotten birthdays, and long absences due to my work. Each example stung, not because they were entirely untrue, but because they lacked context. Vanessa took the stand next, her voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. I've always prioritized Chloe's well-being, she said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. But the truth is, Ethan's demanding schedule has left Chloe feeling unsupported. She needs a parent who can be there for her consistently, and I can provide that. I clenched my fists under the table, biting back the urge to interrupt. Her performance was masterful, each word carefully chosen to sway the judge. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. We'll dismantle this when it's our turn." The turning point came when Richard introduced a fabricated narrative about my supposed neglect. He presented a series of doctored emails and exaggerated claims, painting me as a distant, unreliable father. This correspondence, Richard said, holding up a printed email, shows Dr. Blake ignoring Chloe's request to spend time together, prioritizing his work over her needs. I felt a surge of anger but forced myself to stay composed. I knew the email was taken out of context, and Marcus was quick to object. Your Honor, we intend to prove that these claims are not only misleading but deliberately manipulated to damage Dr. Blake's reputation, Marcus said firmly. The judge nodded. Proceed. Marcus called me to the stand, and as I took my oath, I felt the weight of the room's eyes on me. This was my chance to set the record straight, to show the court who I really was as a father. Dr. Blake, Marcus began, his voice steady. Can you explain the demands of your career and how you've balanced them with your responsibilities as a parent? I took a deep breath. I'm a pediatric surgeon, I said. My job is demanding, and there are times when I've had to make sacrifices. But everything I do, every late night, every long shift, is for Chloe. I've always made her a priority, even if it didn't look that way on the surface. Marcus guided me through a series of questions, allowing me to address each of Vanessa's accusations. I explained the missed school events, detailing how I had always made an effort to make it up to Chloe. I countered the claims of neglect, pointing to the countless hours I had spent helping her with homework, attending her soccer games when I could, and being present in the ways that mattered most. When it was Richard's turn to cross-examine, he was relentless, but I held my ground. His questions were designed to provoke, to make me seem defensive or unprepared, but I refused to take the bait. Dr. Blake, he said, his tone dripping with skepticism, would you say your job has ever caused Chloe to feel like she's second place in your life? I paused, choosing my words carefully. There may have been times when Chloe felt that way, and for that, I take full responsibility. But I've always done my best to show her that she's my world. Actions speak louder than words, and I believe Chloe knows how much she means to me. Richard's smirk faltered, and I felt a small surge of satisfaction. As the day drew to a close, Marcus and I returned to our table, exhausted but resolute. The judge adjourned the hearing, scheduling the next session for the following week. Outside the courthouse, Marcus turned to me with a faint smile. You did great today, he said. They threw everything they had, and you held your ground. I nodded, though the weight of the day still pressed heavily on my shoulders. It's not over yet, I said. No, Marcus agreed, but we're ready for whatever comes next. As I drove home that evening, my thoughts turned to Chloe. This fight wasn't just about winning custody. It was about protecting her from the manipulations and lies that had defined Vanessa's case. I wasn't just fighting for my rights as a parent. I was fighting for Chloe's sense of security, her future, and the bond we had built together. And no matter what Vanessa threw at me, I wouldn't let her take that away. The next hearing arrived faster than I expected, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. This was the day Marcus and I had been waiting for. The day we would present the mountain of evidence we had spent weeks compiling. My nerves were a tangled mess, but I clung to one thought. The truth was on my side. As the session began, the judge looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Bishop, you may present your case. Marcus stood, exuding the calm confidence that had carried me through this entire ordeal. Thank you, Your Honor. Today, we intend to demonstrate that Vanessa Bennett has not only misrepresented the facts but has engaged in manipulative behavior that undermines the best interests of Chloe Blake. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and Richard's confident facade flickered. Marcus began with the financial records, laying out Vanessa's pattern of mismanagement. Your Honor, these documents show that Mrs. Bennett has significant financial instability, including unpaid debts, overdraft fees, and evidence of living beyond her means. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the courtroom. In contrast, Dr. Blake has provided Chloe with a stable home environment, both financially and emotionally. Richard stood to object. Financial difficulties do not equate to unfit parenting, Your Honor. The judge nodded, sustained. But please continue, Mr. Bishop. Marcus didn't miss a beat. While financial issues alone may not determine custody, they are part of a larger pattern of behavior. For example, Mrs. Bennett has used Chloe's school address to apply for credit cards and has made unauthorized withdrawals from joint accounts. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Vanessa's face flushed, but she kept her composure, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her. The next piece of evidence was even more damning. Marcus introduced a series of text messages and emails between Vanessa and Chloe. These messages show a clear pattern of emotional manipulation, he said. He read aloud one particularly pointed message. I know your dad loves you, but don't you think it's unfair that he's always working? I just want what's best for you. The judge's expression hardened. Do you have more examples? We do, Marcus said, scrolling through the documents. He presented several more messages, each one dripping with subtle attempts to turn Chloe against me. Vanessa's lawyer stood again. Your Honor, these messages were taken out of context. My client was simply expressing concern for her daughter's well-being. Marcus countered immediately. Your Honor, when viewed in their entirety, these messages show a calculated effort to alienate Chloe from her father. This is not concern. It's manipulation. The judge nodded. Proceed. Finally, Marcus introduced the recording, the piece of evidence that could shift the entire case. He paused before playing it, glancing at me for confirmation. I gave him a slight nod. It was time. The courtroom fell silent as Vanessa's voice filled the air. Chloe, you need to tell the court that you feel neglected. Just say that Dad doesn't have time for you. If they believe that, they'll give me custody. The recording ended, and the silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's face drained of color, and Richard looked like he'd just been punched in the gut. The judge leaned forward, her expression stern. Mr. Bishop, how did you obtain this recording? It was provided by a mutual acquaintance who was concerned about Mrs. Bennett's tactics, Marcus explained. We can verify its authenticity. The judge nodded, her gaze shifting to Vanessa. Mrs. Bennett, do you have any response to this? Vanessa hesitated, her voice trembling as she spoke. Your Honor, I was just trying to protect my daughter. I didn't mean for it to come across that way. The judge's expression didn't soften. This court takes allegations of parental alienation very seriously. We will consider this evidence carefully. As the day progressed, Marcus continued to dismantle Vanessa's case, piece by piece. He highlighted her financial instability, her history of manipulation, and the stark contrast between her narrative and the reality of my relationship with Chloe. By the time we rested our case, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. Vanessa's lies had been exposed, and the truth was finally out in the open. As we left the courtroom, Marcus turned to me with a rare smile. That recording was the nail in the coffin, he said. They'll struggle to recover from this. I nodded, though the weight of the fight still lingered. I just hope Chloe doesn't feel like she's caught in the middle. She's smarter than you think, Marcus said. Give her time. She'll see the truth. That evening, as I sat on the couch reviewing the day's events, Chloe came into the room. She hesitated before sitting beside me, her expression uncertain. Dad, she said softly, Mom told me you're trying to make her look bad. I looked at her, my heart aching at the confusion in her eyes. Chloe, that's not true. I'm trying to show the court the full picture so they can make the best decision for you. This isn't about making anyone look bad. It's about doing what's right. She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to her hands. I just want this to be over. So do I said, putting an arm around her shoulders. But no matter what happens, I need you to know how much I love you. That's never going to change. Chloe leaned into me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. When we returned to the courtroom the following week, the tension in the air was almost tangible. Marcus and I were prepared to deliver the final blow, but Vanessa and Richard seemed more rattled than usual. The fallout from the recording had left its mark, and they both knew their carefully constructed case was on the verge of collapse. As the judge called the hearing to order, Marcus stood confidently. Your Honor, we'd like to present a summary of the evidence we've submitted thus far, followed by a witness statement that we believe will solidify our argument. The judge nodded, gesturing for him to proceed. Marcus walked to the center of the courtroom, holding a stack of papers. To summarize, the evidence we've presented clearly shows a pattern of manipulation by Mrs. Bennett, including financial mismanagement, emotional coercion, and attempts to alienate Chloe Blake from her father. We've demonstrated that Dr. Blake, despite his demanding career, has provided a stable, loving, and supportive environment for his daughter. He turned to the judge, his voice firm. And now, Your Honor, we'd like to call our final witness to testify to Mrs. Bennett's actions and their impact on Chloe. The courtroom doors opened and Fiona, a longtime family friend and one of Vanessa's former confidants, entered. Vanessa's face drained of color as Fiona took the stand, her expression resolute. Fiona took the oath, then began her testimony. I've known Vanessa for over a decade, she said, her voice steady. And while I've always considered her a friend, I can't ignore what I've seen over the past few years. Vanessa has consistently used Chloe as a pawn in her disputes with Ethan, manipulating her emotions to serve her own agenda. She paused, glancing at Vanessa, who sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I came forward because I believe Chloe deserves the truth. She deserves to be loved and supported without being caught in the middle of her parents' conflict. Marcus leaned forward. Fiona, can you elaborate on the manipulation you witnessed? Fiona nodded. Vanessa often encouraged Chloe to question Ethan's priorities, implying that he cared more about his job than about her. She also made statements suggesting that Chloe would be better off without him, which I found deeply concerning. Her words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Vanessa's lawyer stood abruptly, his face pale. Your Honor, I need a moment to confer with my client. The judge frowned, but granted the request. As Richard and Vanessa huddled together, their whispers frantic, Marcus leaned over to me. They're cracking, he said quietly. This might be the moment we've been waiting for. When the hearing resumed, Richard's tone was markedly subdued. Your Honor, given the evidence presented, my client would like to propose a compromise. The judge raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Richard cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Bennett is willing to share custody, with Chloe spending equal time between both parents. Additionally, she's open to addressing any concerns raised about her financial stability and parenting practices. I glanced at Marcus, who shook his head subtly. No, he whispered. We're not settling for less than what's best for Chloe. Marcus stood. Your Honor, while we appreciate the offer, we believe the evidence overwhelmingly supports Dr. Blake being awarded primary custody. Chloe's well-being is our priority, and we are prepared to proceed with the case to ensure her best interests are upheld. The judge nodded, her expression unreadable. Understood. Let's continue. What happened next was something I never expected. Richard stood, his shoulders slumped, and turned to the judge. Your Honor, I must withdraw as counsel for Mrs. Bennett. The room erupted in murmurs as the judge raised a hand to silence the crowd. Mr. Ames, is this a formal withdrawal? Yes, Your Honor, he said, avoiding Vanessa's furious glare. Given the overwhelming evidence and the ethical concerns raised by recent developments, I cannot, in good conscience, continue to represent Mrs. Bennett. Vanessa shot to her feet, her composure completely shattered. Richard, what are you doing? You can't just quit. Richard turned to her, his expression grim. I'm sorry, Vanessa, but I didn't sign up to defend lies. You've been dishonest with me and the court. I can't represent you any longer. The judge banged her gavel. Mrs. Bennett, please sit down. Mr. Ames, your withdrawal is granted. Mrs. Bennett, you may represent yourself or retain new counsel. We will reconvene in 2 days. As the courtroom emptied, Vanessa sat frozen, her face a mixture of shock and fury. I walked past her without a word, but inside, I felt a strange mix of emotions, vindication, relief, and a lingering sadness for what our relationship had become. Outside, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. Ethan, this is huge. Without a lawyer, Vanessa's case is essentially done. I nodded, though my thoughts were on Chloe. I just want this to be over, for her sake. And it will be, Marcus said. You've done everything right. The truth is on your side. That night, as I sat in Chloe's room, watching her sleep, I felt the weight of the fight lifting, little by little. Vanessa's lawyer had abandoned her, her lies had been exposed, and the court was finally seeing the truth. This wasn't just a victory for me, it was a victory for Chloe. And no matter what happened next, I knew I had done everything in my power to protect her. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Chloe sat across from me at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her eyes were downcast, her usually bright demeanor clouded with uncertainty. I'd asked her to sit down so we could talk, really talk, about everything that had happened. The custody battle, the courtroom drama, Vanessa's actions. I knew Chloe was caught in the middle, and that knowledge weighed on me more than anything else. Chloe, I began gently, breaking the silence. I know these past few weeks have been really hard on you. I'm sorry you've had to go through all this. She looked up at me, her blue eyes searching my face. It's not your fault, Dad, she said softly. I don't know what to think anymore. I nodded, my heart aching for her. That's okay. You don't have to have all the answers right now. I just want to make sure you know how much I love you and how important you are to me. She hesitated, then set her mug down. Mom says you're trying to make her look bad, that you want me to hate her. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my expression calm. Chloe, that's not true, I said firmly. This isn't about making anyone look bad. It's about making sure you have what you need to be happy and safe. That's all I've ever wanted. Her eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away. I just feel like I'm stuck in the middle. Like no matter what I do, I'm letting someone down. You're not letting anyone down, I said, leaning forward to take her hand. This isn't your fight, Chloe. It's between your mom and me. And I promise you, I'm doing everything I can to make sure you don't have to carry this burden. She nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around mine. I heard the recording, she admitted after a long pause. The one where Mom told me to say you didn't care about me. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. How did that make you feel? She shrugged, her voice trembling, confused, angry. I didn't understand why she would say something like that. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Your mom loves you, Chloe. She just has a different way of showing it. Sometimes, people let their emotions get the best of them and make choices they think are right, even when they're not. Chloe looked at me, her eyes filled with doubt. Do you hate her? The question caught me off guard, but I shook my head. No, Chloe, I don't hate her. She's your mom, and she's been a big part of your life. But I don't agree with the choices she's made, and I think it's important for you to understand the truth. She nodded again, her expression thoughtful. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered, for doubting you. My heart ached at her words, and I reached across the table to pull her into a hug. You don't have to apologize, sweetheart, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It's okay to have questions and to feel conflicted. I just want you to know that no matter what, I'm here for you. For a moment, we sat there in silence, her head resting on my shoulder. The weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift just a little, replaced by a sense of connection that had felt strained but never broken. Do you think things will ever go back to normal? She asked quietly. I pulled back to look at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I don't know if things will ever be the same as they were before, I admitted. But I do know that we'll figure out a new normal together. One where you feel safe and loved, and where you don't have to worry about these kinds of things. She nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. I'd like that. That night, as I tucked her into bed, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't felt in weeks. Chloe had seen the truth for herself, and while the journey ahead was still uncertain, I knew we were on the right path. As I stood in the doorway, watching her drift off to sleep, I made a silent promise. I would do whatever it took to protect her, to give her the stability and love she deserved. Vanessa's actions might have shaken us, but they hadn't broken us. Chloe was my world, and together, we would rebuild. The courtroom was quieter than usual as the final hearing drew to a close. Vanessa sat across the aisle, her once unshakable confidence replaced by a palpable nervousness. Her shoulders sagged, and her gaze rarely lifted from the stack of papers in front of her. For the first time, the consequences of her actions seemed to fully register. The judge leaned forward, her tone stern but measured. Based on the evidence presented, including financial records, witness testimony, and recordings provided to this court, it is clear that Mrs. Bennett engaged in behavior detrimental to the emotional well-being of Chloe Blake. This court awards primary custody to Dr. Ethan Blake, with supervised visitation granted to Mrs. Bennett. The words hung in the air like a final verdict on Vanessa's choices. Her sharp inhale echoed in the silent courtroom. The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. Vanessa turned to me as the courtroom emptied, her face a mix of anger and desperation. You've ruined me, Ethan, she said, her voice low but trembling with emotion. Do you even care what this will do to Chloe? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. What I care about is giving Chloe a stable, loving environment. That's something you jeopardized with your choices, not me. She opened her mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it, turning sharply on her heel and walking away. Watching her retreat, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Vanessa had once been someone I cared deeply for, but the person she'd become was almost unrecognizable. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, their cameras flashing as Marcus and I stepped into the sunlight. He raised a hand to block the onslaught of questions while ushering me toward the car. "You handled that well," he said as we climbed inside. "This was never about revenge. It was about doing what was right for Chloe. And the court saw that." I nodded, though the weight of the battle still lingered. "I just hope Vanessa takes this as a wake-up call," I said, "for Chloe's sake." Over the next few weeks, the fallout from the case rippled through Vanessa's life. The media coverage of the recordings and her financial mismanagement damaged her reputation, and many of her friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Her social media accounts, once filled with curated images of perfection, went silent. Chloe, meanwhile, seemed to thrive in the newfound stability of our home. She began opening up more, her laughter returning as we settled into a routine. Still, the shadows of the custody battle lingered, and I knew it would take time for her to fully process everything. One evening, Chloe approached me as I was preparing dinner. "Dad, do you think I should still see Mom?" she asked, her tone hesitant. I set down the knife I was using to chop vegetables and turned to her. "Chloe, that's a decision only you can make. If you feel ready, I'll support you. But if you need more time, that's okay too." She nodded thoughtfully. "I think I want to wait. I don't know how to talk to her right now." "That's okay," I said gently. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here to support you, no matter what." Vanessa's first supervised visitation was scheduled a month later. Chloe decided not to attend, and I didn't push her. Vanessa showed up anyway, sitting alone in the designated room at the community center. When she realized Chloe wasn't coming, she called me, her voice a mix of anger and sorrow. "She's my daughter, Ethan," she said. "You can't keep her from me." "I'm not keeping her from you," I replied calmly. "She's making her own choices, and I'm respecting them. Maybe you should try doing the same." Vanessa didn't respond, and the line went dead. For a long time, I stared at the phone, wondering if she would ever truly understand the impact of her actions. In the weeks that followed, I focused on helping Chloe heal. We started therapy sessions together, where we worked through the lingering emotions from the custody battle. Slowly but surely, she began to rebuild her confidence and trust. One day, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Chloe turned to me and said, "Thanks for fighting for me, Dad." I looked at her, my heart swelling with pride and love. "Always, kiddo," I said. "You're worth every bit of it." Vanessa's life continued to unravel, with legal consequences looming for her financial mismanagement. Marcus informed me that the court was considering charges for her misuse of joint accounts and fraudulent activities. Part of me wanted to feel satisfied, but I couldn't. All I felt was a deep sadness for the person she had become. Despite everything, I decided to reach out to Vanessa one last time. I called her, my tone cautious but sincere. "Vanessa, I know things have been hard, and I don't want to add to your pain. If you're willing, I think we should sit down and figure out how to move forward for Chloe's sake." There was a long pause before she spoke. "I don't know if I can, Ethan," she said, her voice heavy with regret, "but I'll think about it." It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I hung up, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Vanessa's fallout was a tragedy of her own making, but it didn't have to define her forever. And while I couldn't fix her, I could ensure that Chloe and I continued to move forward. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The battle was over, and we had won. Not just in court, but in reclaiming our lives and our future. The morning light filtered through the curtains as I stood in the kitchen, whisking eggs for breakfast. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the coffee machine, a peaceful contrast to the chaos we'd endured over the past few months. Chloe shuffled into the room, her hair tousled from sleep and her oversized sweatshirt hanging loosely on her frame. "Morning, kiddo," I said, smiling as she sat at the kitchen counter. "How do you feel about scrambled eggs and toast?" She nodded, stifling a yawn. "Sounds good." As I cooked, I glanced at her, noting the ease in her posture. It was a far cry from the tension and uncertainty she'd carried during the custody battle. Now, she seemed lighter, more at ease. It was a reminder that the fight had been worth it. Big plans for the day? I asked, sliding her plate across the counter. She shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. Just hanging out. Maybe work on that art project for school. That's my girl, I said, ruffling her hair as I sat down with my own plate. You know, I've been thinking about signing up for a pottery class at the community center. What do you think? Her eyes lit up and she laughed. Pottery? Really? Why not? I said, grinning. Might be fun to try something new. She shook her head, still smiling. You're full of surprises, Dad. The conversation was simple, but it felt monumental. After months of tension, this was the new normal we were building together. A life filled with small, meaningful moments that reminded us of what truly mattered. Later that day, I met with Marcus at the foundation we'd started to support families navigating custody battles and toxic dynamics. The office buzzed with activity, volunteers answering phones and organizing resources for the families we served. It was a project born from my own experiences, and seeing it flourish was deeply rewarding. How's Chloe? Marcus asked as we reviewed the latest progress report. She's good, I said, a note of pride in my voice. She's been smiling more, laughing more. I think she's starting to heal. Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. You both have been through a lot. It's good to see things settling down. We discussed upcoming events and partnerships, including a series of workshops for parents and children. As we wrapped up, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. You've done a lot of good here, Ethan. Turning your pain into something meaningful. It's inspiring. Thanks, Marcus, I said, my voice quiet but sincere. I couldn't have done it without your help. As I left the office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The foundation wasn't just about helping others. It was about honoring the journey Chloe and I had taken together. It was a testament to the strength we'd found in each other. That evening, Chloe and I sat on the couch, a pizza box between us as we watched one of her favorite movies. The laughter came easily, the conversation flowing as if the past few months had never happened. But I knew better. The battle had left its mark, but it had also made us stronger. At one point, Chloe turned to me, her expression serious. Do you think Mom will ever change? She asked softly. I paused, considering my response. I don't know, I said honestly, but I hope she does, for her sake and for yours. People can change, Chloe, but they have to want to. She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. I hope so too. We fell into a comfortable silence, the movie playing in the background. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, marveling at her resilience. Despite everything, she'd held onto her kindness, her curiosity, her light. It was a testament to her strength and to the bond we shared. As the credits rolled, she leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. Thanks for everything, Dad, she murmured. For fighting for me. I wrapped an arm around her, my heart swelling with love. Always, Chloe, I said softly. You're my world. That night, as I stood on the balcony, the cool breeze ruffling my hair, I reflected on the journey we'd taken. The pain, the fear, the uncertainty. It had all led us here, to a place of healing and hope. We weren't just moving forward, we were thriving. The stars glittered above, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the infinite possibilities ahead. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, a certainty that we were exactly where we were meant to be. This was our new beginning, and I couldn't wait to see what the future held.